The first thing I noticed about the valley was not the silence. It was the way the silence seemed to be waiting. I had spent almost 15 years working in remote forests across the eastern United States. I knew what empty wilderness sounded like. I knew the difference between a forest that was simply quiet and a forest that had gone completely still. A quiet forest still had a heartbeat. The movement of leaves high above the ground. The distant call of a bird warning others of danger. The soft cracking of branches as animals moved through the undergrowth. The endless conversation between wind, water, and living things. But this valley had none of that. No birds. No insects. No movement. Just trees standing in the darkness like they were listening. The first report came in during the middle of October. A missing hiker. Then another. Then another. All 3 disappearances happened within the same stretch of the Appalachian Mountains, inside an area locals avoided but refused to explain why. The official explanation was simple. Bad weather. Unmarked trails. Inexperienced hikers. The usual reasons people gave when they wanted the wilderness to remain understandable. But there was one detail buried inside every report that nobody could explain. Every missing person had left behind the same final message. Not a call for help. Not a warning. Just 6 words recorded on their phones before they vanished. I found the valley that listens. When I first heard those words, I thought they were the result of panic. Fear changes the way people think. It makes ordinary things feel impossible. A person lost in the woods for several days can mistake shadows for movement, echoes for voices, and their own thoughts for something outside themselves. I knew that better than anyone. That was why I was sent there. My name is Daniel Mercer. At the time, I worked as a wilderness recovery consultant, mostly assisting search teams in difficult terrain where traditional methods failed. I had spent years studying human behavior in extreme environments. How people react when they are hungry. How they make decisions when they are exhausted. How the mind begins creating patterns when it is surrounded by uncertainty. The wilderness does not need monsters to frighten people. Sometimes it only needs enough darkness and enough time. I grew up near the mountains of Western Virginia. My father was a forest surveyor, and when I was young, I believed the woods were the safest place in the world. He taught me something I never forgot. The forest isn't dangerous because it's cruel, he used to tell me. It's dangerous because it doesn't care if you understand it. Back then, I thought those words were just another lesson from an older man who had spent too much time alone among trees. Years later, I realized he was trying to prepare me for something. Something he had experienced but never fully explained. My father disappeared when I was 22. Not in some mysterious way. Not like the people in those reports. His truck was found on an old mountain road after a winter storm. He had gone out to check a damaged survey marker and never returned. The search lasted 11 days. They found his backpack near a creek. His compass. His notebook. His jacket. Everything except him. People told me accidents happen in the mountains. They told me to accept it. For years I tried. But there was one thing that bothered me. The last page of his notebook was not filled with measurements or trail coordinates. It contained a single sentence. Written 3 times. The valley moves when you stop looking. I never understood what he meant. Until I entered that valley myself. The Appalachian Mountains are old in a way that is difficult for people to imagine. Older than roads. Older than towns. Older than the names we gave the places. There are sections of those mountains where maps become less reliable. Where trails disappear beneath decades of fallen leaves. Where abandoned logging roads slowly become swallowed by roots and moss. The area I was assigned to investigate was called Black Hollow. It was not officially marked as dangerous. That would have made people curious. Instead, it was simply ignored. A forgotten section of wilderness between 2 protected forest zones, surrounded by steep ridges and dense woodland. The local residents had another name for it. The Silent Valley. When I arrived at the nearest ranger station, the weather had already begun changing. A cold rain moved through the mountains, turning the dirt roads into rivers of mud. Thick fog settled between the trees, hiding the peaks above. The ranger who met me was an older man named Elias Boone. He had worked in those mountains for 30 years. When I introduced myself, he looked at my equipment, then looked back at me. "You planning on going alone?" I nodded. "That's the best way to track movement patterns." He stared at me for a few seconds. Then he looked toward the mountains. "You ever been there before?" "No." "Good." The answer surprised me. "Good?" He adjusted his jacket and lowered his voice. "Some places remember when people come back." I waited for him to laugh. He didn't. I assumed he was trying to scare me away. People who live near wilderness often develop strange beliefs. Stories get passed down through generations. A warning becomes a legend. A legend becomes something people repeat without knowing where it started. I had heard hundreds of them. The old mountain spirits. The lights between the trees. The voices calling from empty cabins. Most had reasonable explanations. Almost all of them. I spent the night at the ranger station reviewing the missing person reports. The first victim was a 28-year-old photographer named Melissa Carter. Her final known location was a trail approximately 14 miles from Black Hollow. The second was a college geology student named Aaron Wells. The third was a retired military survival instructor named Thomas Reed. That last one bothered me. People like Thomas Reed do not simply disappear. They are trained to survive. They understand navigation. They understand weather. They understand fear. Yet his final recording was almost identical to the others. His phone captured 23 seconds of audio. At first, there was only breathing. Heavy breathing. Then his voice. Quiet. Confused. Almost like he was speaking to someone standing directly beside him. "I thought the trail was behind me." A pause. Then, "But it's been behind me for an hour." Another pause. And finally, "I don't think I'm lost." His breathing became faster. "I think the forest changed." The recording ended there. I listened to it 5 times that night. Not because I believed something supernatural had happened. Because I was trying to understand the psychology behind his words. People who become lost often experience something called spatial disorientation. The brain creates false confidence. You believe you are moving in a straight line when you are actually walking in circles. You believe landmarks are changing when your memory is simply failing. The mind is not a perfect navigation system. It is an imperfect survival tool. But there was one problem. All 3 people described the same thing. A valley they could not find again. A place that seemed to appear only after they stopped searching for it. A place where their sense of direction stopped working. The next morning, I entered Black Hollow. The first few hours were normal. Almost disappointingly normal. The trail was old but visible. The forest was dense but manageable. The rain had stopped, leaving droplets hanging from branches like glass. I followed the last known route of Thomas Reed. His footprints were gone. His equipment was gone. His trail was gone. But around noon, I found something strange. A tree. Not unusual by itself. The Appalachian forest was full of ancient trees. But this one had markings carved into the bark. Lines. Hundreds of them. Vertical scratches covering the entire trunk. At first, I assumed they were from animals. Bears sometimes damage trees. But when I stepped closer, I realized they were not random. They were symbols. Human-made symbols. Old ones? I took photographs. Then I noticed something written near the bottom. A sentence carved into the bark. The letters were weathered. Almost erased by time. But still readable. "Do not follow the sound of your own voice." I stood there for several minutes, trying to decide what bothered me more. The message itself. Or the fact that whoever carved it had gone through the effort to warn someone who had not arrived yet. The forest around me remained completely silent. No birds. No insects. Nothing. Then I heard it. A sound from somewhere deeper in the trees. A voice. My voice. "Daniel." Every muscle in my body tightened. I turned around. Nobody was there. The rational part of my mind immediately started explaining it. An echo. A recording. A person hiding nearby. A trick of distance and terrain. Anything. Anything except the impossible answer. Because the voice had not called my name from somewhere ahead. Or behind. Or to either side. It had come from the trees. And it had sounded exactly like me. I stood there with my hand on my radio, staring into the darkness between the trees. Waiting for it to happen again. It did. Only this time, the voice was quieter. Closer. Daniel! And that was the moment I understood something was wrong with Black Hollow. The missing people were not disappearing because they could not find their way out. They were disappearing because something was convincing them to go deeper. And somehow, whatever waited inside that valley already knew my name. I did not answer. That was the first decision I made in Black Hollow that I still believe kept me alive. Because every instinct I had told me to respond. That is what humans do. When we hear our name, we answer. It is one of the oldest reactions built into us. Before language, before civilization, before we understood the world around us, hearing another human voice meant connection. Safety. Another person. But standing there beneath those trees, with that voice calling from somewhere beyond the trail, I felt something I had never experienced before. The feeling that answering would not prove I was human. It would prove something else was listening. I slowly removed my hand from my radio. The forest remained still. I waited. 10 seconds. 30. A full minute. Nothing. The voice never came again. Eventually, I forced myself to continue moving. I told myself it was an auditory illusion. Stress. Fatigue. The psychological effects of entering a place where 3 people had disappeared. The human brain is extremely good at creating meaning where there is none. That was the explanation. I repeated it several times as I walked. Not because I believed it. Because I needed to. The trail became narrower as I moved deeper into the valley. The trees grew closer together, their branches twisting above me until the sky became a thin gray line. The Appalachian forest has a way of making distance feel different. A place that appears 50 yards away can take 20 minutes to reach. A hill that looks small can exhaust you. The wilderness changes your relationship with space. But Black Hollow felt different. The farther I traveled, the less connected the landscape seemed. I began noticing small details that did not fit. A fallen tree blocking the path. I stepped over it. 10 minutes later, I saw the same tree. At first, I assumed I had turned around without realizing it. It happens. Even experienced hikers make mistakes. I checked my compass. The needle moved normally. My GPS showed my position. Everything appeared functional. I marked the location on my map and continued. An hour later, I found another strange thing. A backpack. It was hanging from a branch beside the trail. Old. Wet. Covered in moss. I immediately recognized it. It belonged to Melissa Carter, the missing photographer. Her name was written on a small identification tag inside the front pocket. My first thought was relief. Not because I had found her. Because I had found evidence. Evidence meant logic. Evidence meant there was a reason. A mistake. An accident. Something explainable. I opened the bag carefully. Inside were several camera batteries, a notebook, a water filter, and a small digital recorder. The recorder still had power. That was impossible. It had been missing for almost 3 weeks. I pressed play. At first, there was only static. Then Melissa's voice. I don't know where I am anymore. Her voice sounded exhausted. Not afraid. That was what disturbed me. Fear would have made sense. But she sounded like someone who had accepted something she could not understand. The trail keeps returning. A pause. I thought I was walking in circles. Another pause. But I'm not. I heard movement in the background. Leaves. Footsteps. Then Melissa whispered. There is someone here. The recording went quiet. I leaned closer. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then another voice appeared. A woman's voice. Soft. Distant. Melissa. My grip tightened around the recorder. The voice sounded exactly like Melissa. Same tone. Same rhythm. Same person. Except Melissa was the one holding the recorder. The recording continued. I heard Melissa breathing faster. Then she whispered, "That's not me." The audio ended. I stood alone in the middle of the forest holding a recorder that contained something my mind refused to process. I replayed it. Again. And again. Each time, I searched for an explanation. A second person. A mistake. A recording artifact. Anything. But the more I listened, the worse it became. Because the second voice did not sound like a copy. It sounded like someone practicing. Like something had learned how a human voice worked. I packed the recorder away and decided to return. Not because I was afraid. At least, that was what I told myself. I returned because I had enough information. The search had changed. I no longer needed to go deeper. But when I checked my map, I realized something. I had no idea where I was. Not approximately. Not generally. Not even close. My GPS showed a blank screen. The battery was full. The device was working. But the map had disappeared. Only a single message remained. Location unavailable. I had used that GPS unit in deserts, mountains, and severe storms. I had never seen that message before. I pulled out my compass. The needle spun slowly. Then stopped. Pointing directly behind me. I turned around. Nothing. Only trees. I started walking back the way I came. After 20 minutes, I found the same marked tree. The one with the warning carved into it. I stopped. My stomach dropped. Because I knew exactly where I had been. And I knew exactly where I was supposed to be. The distance between those 2 points should have been impossible. I had not walked in a circle. I had walked straight. I checked my watch. 2 hours had passed. According to my memory, I had only been walking for 20 minutes. That was when the first real fear entered my mind. Not panic. Not terror. Something colder. A professional understanding. Something was happening that I did not have the tools to measure. I set up camp near the tree. The safest decision in unknown terrain is always the same. Stop moving. Moving without understanding your location makes every mistake worse. I built a small shelter. Started a fire. Checked my equipment. Everything was normal. That almost made it worse. The world around me was impossible. But my gear was telling me everything was fine. The contradictions started affecting me. The human mind needs consistency. When reality and experience disagree, the brain tries to repair the difference. Sometimes it creates explanations. Sometimes it creates memories. Sometimes it creates fear. That night, I experienced something I had never written in any survival report. I was afraid of my own thoughts. Because every time I closed my eyes, I remembered my father's notebook. The valley moves when you stop looking. I had spent years assuming he meant the landscape. That trails changed. That mountains were unpredictable. But sitting beside that fire, listening to a forest with no sounds, I wondered if he meant something else. Maybe he was talking about perception. Maybe the valley did not move. Maybe we did. Maybe the place was not changing. Maybe it was changing us. Around midnight I heard footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Moving around my campsite. I grabbed my flashlight and waited. The footsteps stopped. A few seconds passed. Then my radio turned on. I had not touched it. Static filled the darkness. Then a voice came through. "Daniel!" My entire body froze. It was my voice. Again. But this time, it was coming from my own radio. I reached toward it. Then stopped. Because beneath my voice, beneath the static, I heard something else. A second sound. A whisper. Hundreds of whispers. all speaking at once, all repeating the same sentence. Don't let him remember. The radio went silent. The fire cracked. The trees stood motionless. And for the first time since entering Black Hollow, I considered a possibility I had refused to accept. Maybe the missing people were not trying to escape the valley. Maybe they were trying to escape something that had followed them out. Something that did not live in the forest. Something that lived inside their memories. I stayed awake until sunrise. When the first light appeared, I discovered something carved into the ground outside my shelter. I knew I had not made it. I knew nobody had approached my camp. Because there were no footprints. No disturbed leaves. No evidence that anything had been there. Just a message pressed into the dirt. 6 words. The same 6 words from the missing reports. I found the valley that listens. But this time, there was something different. A second line had been added beneath it. 4 more words. Words that made my blood run cold. Now it found you. I stared at the message in the dirt until the morning light completely reached the valley. I did not move. I did not breathe normally. I simply watched those words sitting there in front of me, trying to force my mind to accept what my eyes were seeing. Now it found you. The problem was not the message itself. The problem was that I had no idea what it meant. A person? An animal? A psychological phenomenon? A trick created by someone who wanted to frighten people away. Every explanation required something I could understand. And Black Hollow had started taking away my ability to understand. I photographed the message. Then I photographed it again. I recorded the coordinates manually. I wrote everything down in my notebook. That was something I had learned over years of fieldwork. When your mind starts questioning reality, document everything. Facts become anchors. Numbers. Times. Distances. Physical evidence. Things you can return to later and say, this happened. This was real. But as I finished writing, I noticed something disturbing. My handwriting looked different. Not completely. Just enough to bother me. The letters were slightly larger. The pressure of the pen was heavier. The words looked rushed. Angry. I stared at the page for several seconds. Then I remembered something. I had written in my notebook the previous night. After hearing the radio. After hearing the whispers. I checked the previous pages. My notes were there. But the final paragraph was not written in my memory. I read it slowly. I remember my father standing in the valley. I stopped. My hand tightened around the notebook. Because that sentence was impossible. I had never seen my father in Black Hollow. My father disappeared years before I ever entered that place. I continued reading. I remember him telling me not to follow. Another line. I remember ignoring him. I closed the notebook. My heart was beating faster. Not because I believed the words. Because some part of me did. And that frightened me more than anything else. The human brain is not like a camera. It does not store perfect recordings of the past. Every time we remember something, we rebuild it. We reshape it. We fill gaps. We change details without realizing it. But I knew my own memories. I knew my father's face. His voice. The way he spoke. The way he walked through the woods. And suddenly, standing in that valley, I had a memory of something that had never happened. That was when I understood the true danger of Black Hollow. It was not that the valley could make you lost. It was that it could make you doubt where you had been. And if you could not trust your own memories, you could not trust yourself. I packed my equipment immediately. The plan was simple. Find the original trail. Leave. Report everything. Never return. But when I checked my supplies, I noticed something else missing. My emergency flare. I knew exactly where I kept it. The side pocket of my backpack. I had checked that pocket the night before. It was there. Now it was gone. At first, I assumed I had dropped it. I searched the campsite. Nothing. Then I noticed something near the tree line. A small red object lying between the leaves. The flare. I walked toward it. Slowly. Carefully. Not because I expected something to attack me. Because I was beginning to understand something. Black Hollow did not need to chase people. It only needed to make them question themselves. The flare was sitting 20 yards away. Exactly 20 yards. I measured it. Then I measured the distance back to my campsite. Nothing unusual. Except for one detail. Between my shelter and the flare was a line of footprints. My footprints. From my own boots. Leading away from my campsite. I stared at them. Because they were fresh. The soil was still pressed down. The leaves were still moving slightly. But I had not walked there. I had been awake all night. I had watched the entire area. Nobody had approached. Nobody had left. Yet my footprints were there. I followed them. Against every survival instinct I had. I followed them because I needed an answer. The footprints led into the trees. Not far. Only about 100 feet. Then they stopped. At the base of another tree. Carved into the bark was a symbol. The same symbol I had seen earlier. But beneath it was something new. A name. My name. Daniel Mercer. I stepped backward. My first thought was that someone had followed me. Someone who knew who I was. Someone who had access to my records. But that explanation collapsed immediately. The carving was old. The bark around the letters had already begun growing over. It had been there for years. Maybe decades. Long before I arrived. I touched the letters. The bark was cold. Almost unnaturally cold. And then I heard something behind me. A sound. Not a voice this time. A breath. A slow inhale. Right beside my ear. I turned. Nothing. Only trees. But something had changed. The forest was no longer silent. The sounds had returned. Birds. Wind. Leaves. The normal life of the woods. Except every sound was wrong. Too delayed. Too distant. Like I was hearing a recording of the forest instead of the forest itself. I returned to my campsite. I did not run. Running creates mistakes. Fear makes people careless. I moved slowly. I kept my breathing controlled. I followed every rule I had ever learned. But inside my mind, something had already broken. Because I had spent my entire career studying survival. And survival depended on one belief. That the world around you followed rules. Even dangerous places had rules. The weather. The terrain. The animals. The human body. Everything had patterns. Black Hollow had patterns too. But they were not patterns I understood. Around midday, I finally found a road. Or what I thought was a road. An old logging path covered with moss and fallen branches. I followed it for nearly an hour. Then I saw a building. A small wooden structure hidden between the trees. An abandoned ranger station. I approached carefully. The building looked like it had been untouched for decades. The windows were broken. The roof was partially collapsed. A faded sign hung above the door. Black Hollow Observation Cabin. I stopped. Because according to every map I had studied, there was no observation cabin in this area. I entered. Inside, everything was covered in dust. Old equipment. Broken radios. Weather instruments. A rusted filing cabinet. It looked abandoned. But not empty. Someone had been there recently. A chair was pulled away from a desk. A notebook was open. A coffee cup sat beside it. Fresh. I touched the cup. Cold. But not old. Someone had been here. Recently. I opened the notebook. The first pages contained weather records from the 1970s. Temperature readings. Rainfall. Forest observations. Normal. Then I reached the final pages. And my hands began shaking. Because the handwriting was familiar. It was my father's. The last entry was dated 3 days before he disappeared. I read the first line. Something in this valley imitates what we leave behind, I continued. It does not create voices. It does not create memories. It only finds the ones already inside us. I turned the page. The final entry was shorter. Almost rushed. If Daniel ever comes here, tell him the truth. My heart stopped. The next sentence was written darker. Pressed so hard the paper had almost torn. The valley is not remembering him. I swallowed. Then I read the final words. It is making him remember itself. I dropped the notebook. Outside, somewhere deep in the trees, something moved. Not quickly. Not aggressively. Slowly. Like it knew there was no reason to hurry. Because eventually, everything that entered Black Hollow came back to it. Including me. I did not leave the cabin immediately. That is something I still struggle to explain. Every survival instinct I had was telling me to get out. The moment I discovered my father's handwriting inside a forgotten observation cabin that supposedly did not exist, the correct decision should have been obvious. Leave. Find the trail. Find another person. Get as far away from Black Hollow as possible. But instead I stayed. Because buried underneath the fear was something stronger. A question. A question I had carried for most of my adult life. What happened to my father? For years I had accepted the official explanation. A mountain accident. A wrong turn. A fall somewhere nobody could reach. But now I was standing inside a building that contained his final words. Words that suggested he knew something. Words that suggested he was not lost. He had been searching. I picked up the notebook again. The pages were fragile. The ink had faded. But the handwriting was unmistakable. My father always pressed too hard when he wrote. He said it helped him think. I remembered watching him fill field journals when I was a child. Maps. Measurements. Weather patterns. Notes about plants and animals. He treated the wilderness like a language. Something that could be studied if you paid enough attention. But this notebook was different. The scientific observations slowly disappeared. Replaced by questions. Observations that sounded less like research and more like someone trying to understand a nightmare. One entry read, Day 4. The trail markers are unchanged, but I no longer recognize the path. I turned the page. Day 5. I found my own notes written before I remember writing them. Another page. Day 7. The valley does not alter the land. It alters the relationship between memory and place. I stopped there. Because that sentence sounded exactly like something I would write. Not my father. Me. The same way of thinking. The same need to explain the impossible. For a moment, I wondered if I had inherited more from him than I realized. Not just his love for the wilderness. Not just his curiosity. But his inability to walk away from something unexplained. At the bottom of the page was another sentence. Smaller. Almost hidden. Curiosity is the first step into the forest. I turned the page. There was nothing else. The notebook ended. I closed it and sat in silence. Outside, rain began falling again. Soft at first. Then heavier. The sound filled the cabin. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. A man sitting alone in an abandoned building during a storm. A strange discovery. A mystery. Nothing more. Then I noticed the photograph. It was pinned to the wall above the desk. At first, I thought it was a picture of the forest. A survey image. But when I looked closer, I saw people standing in front of the cabin. 3 men. 2 women. A research team. The photograph was old. The edges were damaged. But one person immediately caught my attention. My father. I stepped closer. He looked younger. Probably around the same age I was when he disappeared. But there was something else. Someone else was standing beside him. A man facing away from the camera. His face was hidden. I examined the image carefully. The person was wearing an old Forest Service jacket. Nothing unusual. Until I noticed something. The jacket had a name patch. I zoomed in with my camera. The image was blurry, but the letters were visible. D. Mercer. My name. My father's name. I stared at the photograph, trying to convince myself there was an explanation. Maybe it was another Mercer. Maybe the image was mislabeled. Maybe my mind was connecting things because I wanted answers. That was the dangerous thing about Black Hollow. It gave you just enough information to make you chase the next piece. It never forced you. It invited you. I searched the cabin. Behind a collapsed shelf, I found a metal storage box. Inside were old reports. Not government files. Not secret documents. Just field research. Weather studies. Wildlife observations. Notes from people trying to understand a strange environment. But one folder was different. It contained interviews. Handwritten transcripts from previous researchers. Most of them were incomplete. The first interview was with a woman named Clara Whitmore, a botanist. The date was 1983. The first line read, "Subject reports hearing familiar voices within the valley." I continued, "Subject believes the phenomenon does not imitate people. It imitates emotional connections." The next page. Subject states the voices do not call strangers. They call people you miss. I felt a cold sensation move through my body. Because I knew exactly what my father meant when he wrote about memory. The valley was not creating random illusions. It was finding weaknesses. Grief. Regret. Loss. The things people carry with them even when they believe they have moved on. I turned to the next interview. A man named Robert Hale. A wilderness guide. His statement was only 3 sentences. "I heard my brother calling. My brother died 20 years ago. I followed anyway." The interview ended there. The final document was not an interview. It was a handwritten note. No name. No date. Just one warning. "If you hear someone you love inside the valley, do not answer." I closed the folder. Then I heard it. A sound outside. A footstep. I froze. The rain continued. The cabin remained dark. Another step. Closer. I reached for my flashlight. My hand was shaking. Not because I thought something was going to attack me. Because I already knew what I was afraid of. I was afraid of what voice I would hear. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A long silence followed. Then someone knocked. 3 slow knocks. My body went completely still. Nobody should have been there. Nobody knew where I was. Nobody could have followed me through that valley. The door handle moved. Slowly. Carefully. I raised my flashlight. "Who's there?" The words escaped before I could stop them. The moment I spoke, I regretted it. Because the answer came immediately. A voice from the other side. My father's voice. "Daniel." Everything inside me stopped. The years disappeared. The fear disappeared. For one brief second, I was not a wilderness investigator standing inside an abandoned cabin. I was a child again. Standing beside my father in the woods. Hearing him call my name. The voice continued. "I know you're scared." My hand lowered slightly. That was the most dangerous moment of my entire experience. Not when I heard the impossible. Not when I saw things I could not explain. But when something impossible sounded familiar. Because fear makes us cautious. But love makes us vulnerable. The voice outside spoke again. "I should have told you the truth." A tear formed in my eye before I even realized it. Because there was a part of me that wanted to believe. Wanted to open the door. Wanted to finally have the conversation I never got to have. But another part of me remembered the warning. Do not answer. Do not follow. Do not trust what the valley gives back. I stepped closer to the door. My hand moved toward the lock. Then I noticed something. The rain outside was falling. I could hear it hitting the roof. I could hear it hitting the trees. But I could not hear it hitting the person standing outside. No footsteps. No breathing. No movement. Nothing. Just a voice. A voice with no body. I stepped away from the door. The voice changed. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Slowly. Like something realizing it needed a different approach. My father's voice became softer. Younger. Then older. Then unfamiliar. Until finally, it became mine. Daniel. The voice whispered my name. Open the door. I backed away. The cabin lights flickered. The old radio on the desk turned on by itself. Static filled the room. Then a recording began playing. My own voice. From earlier that day. The moment I entered Black Hollow. The moment I first heard the forest call my name. But beneath my voice was another sound. A whisper I had not noticed before. A whisper hidden under the recording. 4 words. Repeated again and again. Bring him deeper. The cabin went silent. The door stopped moving. The voice outside disappeared. And for the first time, I understood what Black Hollow had been doing. The missing people were never the mystery. The mystery was why the valley wanted them. And now, I knew the answer. Because it was not looking for bodies. It was looking for memories. And somehow, my memories were the ones it had been waiting for. I stayed inside the cabin until the rain stopped. Not because I felt safe. Because I finally understood something important. The cabin was not a shelter. It was a place where Black Hollow wanted me to be. That realization changed everything. Before that moment, I had been treating the valley like an environment. A dangerous location. A place with strange conditions that needed to be studied. But environments do not call your name. They do not use the voices of people you have lost. They do not open old wounds and wait to see what comes out. Black Hollow was not simply a place. It was an experience. A pressure applied to the human mind. And the longer I remained there, the more I began to understand why people disappeared. They were not physically trapped. At least, not at first. They were emotionally trapped. The valley did not need to force anyone deeper. It only needed to offer them something they desperately wanted. A final conversation. A second chance. A moment they believed they had lost forever. And humans will walk into almost any darkness if they think someone they love is waiting on the other side. I spent the next hour examining the cabin. Not searching for answers. Searching for patterns. That was the only way I knew how to fight fear. Turn it into information. I searched through every document. Every photograph. Every piece of equipment. And slowly, I discovered something that changed the way I viewed the disappearances. The missing people were not random. They all had unfinished memories. Melissa Carter, the photographer, had lost her younger sister years earlier. According to a note found in her belongings, she had never forgiven herself for not answering her sister's final phone call. Aaron Wells, the geology student, had recently abandoned his father's dream of becoming a scientist after his father died. Thomas Reed, the survival instructor, had spent decades blaming himself for the death of a soldier during a rescue mission. Every person who entered Black Hollow carried something unresolved. A memory they avoided. A regret they buried. A conversation they never finished. The valley did not create fear. It discovered it. I looked at my own reflection in the broken window. And for the first time, I wondered what it had found inside me. The answer came immediately. My father. I had spent years telling myself I wanted to know what happened to him because I needed closure. But that was not the truth. Closure was something people talked about when they wanted to sound healed. The truth was simpler. I wanted one more chance. One more conversation. One more moment where he could explain why he left. Why he disappeared. Why he chose the forest over coming home. And Black Hollow knew that. Somehow it knew. I left the cabin before sunset. The weather had cleared. The fog was thinner. For the first time since entering the valley, I could see the mountains around me. And they looked wrong. Not physically. That would have been easier. The trees were still trees. The hills were still hills. The landscape had not changed. But something about the distance felt different. The mountains looked closer than they should. Like the entire valley had folded inward. Like I was standing inside a photograph that had been slowly shrinking. I followed my compass. Or tried to. The needle still moved strangely. But instead of spinning randomly, it now pointed toward the same direction every time. East. Toward the center of the valley. I should have gone the opposite way. I knew that. Every logical thought in my head told me to move west. Find the original trail. Find civilization. But something stopped me. Not a voice. Not a hallucination. A realization. If I left without understanding what happened to my father, I would spend the rest of my life wondering. And I had already spent enough years wondering. That was the most dangerous thing Black Hollow had done. It had convinced me that curiosity was my choice. But maybe it was just another form of temptation. I moved deeper. The forest changed gradually. The trees became older. Larger. Some were so wide that 3 people could not have wrapped their arms around them. Moss covered everything. The ground became softer. Almost like walking across layers of forgotten years. Then I found the first sign that I was approaching the center. A trail marker. An old wooden post. Half buried in the earth. The paint was faded. But the words were still visible. Black Hollow Research Area? Below that, someone had scratched another message. Not everything that returns is alive. I stood there for a long time. Because I realized something. The messages were not warnings for people entering the valley. They were warnings for people who had already been changed by it. I continued forward. An hour later, I found the remains of another structure. Not a cabin. Something larger. A research station. Abandoned decades ago. The roof had collapsed. The walls were covered with vines. But inside, I found something impossible. A wall filled with photographs. Hundreds of them. Researchers. Explorers. Missing people. Some photographs were old. Some were recent. Too recent. I found Melissa. Aaron. Thomas. All 3 of them. Standing in front of the research station. But there was something strange. The photographs were not from before they disappeared. They were from after. They showed them inside the valley. Alive. Standing together. Looking directly at the camera. I moved closer. My breathing became shallow. Because there was one more photograph. One I had not expected to see. A photograph of me. Standing in the same place. The same research station. The same wall behind me. Except I was not looking at the camera. I was looking at something behind it. Something outside the frame. I checked the date. My hands went cold. The photograph was dated tomorrow. I dropped it. I told myself it was impossible. A trick. A fake. Someone trying to manipulate me. But then I noticed something else. The photograph was not printed on modern paper. It was old. Weathered. The edges were damaged. Like it had been hanging there for years. I picked it up again. On the back was a handwritten note. 5 words. Written in my father's handwriting. The choice comes after remembering. Then I heard footsteps. Behind me. Inside the station. Slow. Approaching. I turned around. And there he was. My father. Not a voice. Not a recording. Not a reflection. A person. Standing in the doorway. Older than I remembered. Exactly as he would have looked if he had survived. His hair was gray. His face was tired. His eyes were filled with something I had not seen in years. Regret. I could not speak. Neither could he. For several seconds, we simply looked at each other. Then he said, "I was hoping you wouldn't come here." My throat tightened. Because that was not what I expected. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I miss you." Not an explanation. A warning. I finally found my voice. "Are you real?" He looked away. And that answer told me more than words could have. "I don't know anymore." The forest outside became silent again. My father stepped closer. Daniel, you need to listen carefully. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where had he been? Why did he leave? How was he alive? But his expression stopped me. Because he looked afraid. Not of me. Not of the valley. Of what was coming. The valley doesn't keep people here, he said. It keeps the parts of them they refuse to let go. I stared at him. What does that mean? He looked toward the trees. Then back at me. It means you need to decide what you are willing to lose. A sound came from outside. Not footsteps. Not a voice. Something worse. Hundreds of voices. All speaking at once. Every missing person. Every researcher. Every person who had entered Black Hollow. Calling from the darkness. Calling my name. My father grabbed my arm. And for the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Whatever happens next, he whispered, do not believe everything you remember. The voices outside grew louder. The walls of the research station began to creak. And then I realized something. My father had not been waiting for me to find him. He had been waiting for me to remember why he disappeared. And somewhere deep inside Black Hollow, something was beginning to wake up. My father did not look like a man who had been waiting 30 years to be found. He looked like a man who had been hiding for 30 years. There was a difference. People who wait have hope. People who hide have fear. And standing there inside that ruined research station, with the voices moving through the trees outside, I realized something that hurt more than I expected. A part of me had imagined this moment my entire life. Finding him. Hearing his explanation. Understanding why he left. I had imagined him older. Changed. Maybe even regretful. But I had never imagined him afraid. My father was the strongest person I had ever known. When I was a child, storms did not scare him. Cold nights did not scare him. Getting lost did not scare him. He had walked into wilderness areas where most people refused to go. He had spent days alone with nothing but a compass and a notebook. Fear was something he studied. Something he understood. But now, looking at him, I saw something different. He was not studying fear. He was experiencing it. How are you here? I finally asked. My voice sounded distant. Almost like someone else was speaking. My father looked at the floor. I don't know how to answer that. Try. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Like he had been carrying a weight for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to put it down. I came here because I was investigating the same thing you're investigating. The disappearances? He shook his head. No. He looked at me. The returns. I felt a cold sensation move through my body. What returns? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the wall of photographs. He touched one of them. An old picture of a researcher standing beside a tree. The first people who entered Black Hollow were not searching for something strange. They were searching for something missing. I said nothing. He continued. Every person who comes here believes they are looking for an answer. They think they want information. They think they want the truth. His fingers moved across the photograph. But the valley doesn't give people answers. It gives them what they are unable to release. I looked at the photographs again. The missing hikers. The researchers. My own picture. What is this place? My father stared at the trees outside. I spent years trying to find a scientific explanation. An environmental cause. A geological reason. Something measurable. A faint, bitter smile crossed his face. I failed. The voices outside continued. They were louder now. Not just calling my name. Calling memories. I heard a child's laughter. A woman's voice crying. A man shouting. Sounds from moments that did not belong to this place. My father moved quickly. We need to leave. I looked at him. Can we? He hesitated. That hesitation was the answer. No. The honesty frightened me more than anything else. You've been here for 30 years. I know. So there is no way out? There is. His eyes met mine. But not the way you think. I waited. He took a deep breath. The valley doesn't trap your body. It traps your attention. I frowned. What does that mean? It means every time you try to understand it, you become part of it. I looked around the station. The broken equipment. The photographs. The old notes. You studied this place. Yes. You tried to understand it. Yes. And that's why you stayed. His silence confirmed it. I felt anger rising. Not fear. Anger. You let us think you were dead. His expression changed. I know. My entire life. I know. I thought you abandoned me. Those words came out before I could stop them. The room became quiet. My father looked down. And for the first time, I saw the pain behind his eyes. I thought leaving was the only way to protect you. Protect me? I laughed once. A bitter sound. You disappeared. I know. You destroyed our family. I know. His voice cracked slightly. I thought if I came back, it would follow me. I stopped. The anger faded. What follows you? My father looked toward the doorway. And I saw something in his expression. Recognition. Like he was looking at someone standing behind me. I turned. Nothing. Only darkness. But then I noticed something. The photographs on the wall had changed. Not dramatically. Not like a movie. Something much worse. Something subtle. The people in the pictures were no longer looking at the camera. They were looking at me. I stepped back. My father noticed. You see it now? I shook my head. No. Because saying yes would make it real. My father approached the wall. When people enter this place, they expect to find something hidden. They expect a creature. A secret. An explanation. He touched the photograph of me. But the valley doesn't hide anything. It reveals. I looked at him. Reveals what? He looked directly at me. The parts of yourself you buried. A sound came from outside. A voice. My mother's voice. I froze. My mother had died when I was 19. Cancer. Years before my father disappeared. But there it was. Outside the station. Soft. Gentle. Calling my name. Daniel. My father grabbed my shoulder. Don't listen. I looked toward the door. That's not her. No. His grip tightened. But that doesn't mean it isn't using something real. The voice came again. Closer. You've been alone for so long. My chest tightened. Because the voice was right. Not completely. But enough. I had spent years alone. Not physically. Emotionally. I had built my entire life around understanding the wilderness because I could not understand the loss I carried. The voice continued. You still blame yourself. I stopped breathing. My father looked at me. He knew. What is it talking about? I ignored him. Because suddenly I was no longer standing inside the research station. I was somewhere else. A memory. A summer evening. I was 20 years old. My mother was sick. My father was preparing for another survey trip. We argued. I told him he cared more about the forest than his own family. I told him I hated that place. I told him I wished he would never come back. 2 days later, he disappeared. I had carried those words for years. Words spoken by an angry son. Words I could never take back. The voice outside whispered. You sent him away. I closed my eyes. My father looked at me. Daniel. I opened my eyes. He was standing there. Real. Afraid. I need you to understand something. The voices outside stopped. The silence that followed was worse. My father spoke quietly. The valley cannot create your pain. It cannot invent your regrets. It can only show you what was already there. I looked at him. Then why are you still here? He did not answer immediately. When he finally did, his voice was almost a whisper. Because I couldn't let go. The ground beneath the station shifted slightly. Dust fell from the ceiling. The voices returned. But this time, they were not outside. They were everywhere. Inside the walls. Inside the floor. Inside my own thoughts. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. My own voice. Speaking from somewhere deep beneath the research station. Not a recording. Not an imitation. A future version. A version of me that sounded exhausted. Broken. Whispering one sentence. I finally understand why they stayed. My father looked at the floor. The fear on his face returned. Because he knew what I did not. Something beneath us had been waiting. Not for my father. Not for the missing people. For me. The floor cracked open. And beneath the research station was not a basement. Not a cave. Not a tunnel. It was a room. An old room. Filled with hundreds of notebooks. Hundreds of recordings. Hundreds of memories. All belonging to people who had entered Black Hollow. My father grabbed my arm. Daniel, we have to go. I looked down into the room. And among all the forgotten journals, I saw one lying open. A notebook with my name written on the cover. My handwriting. My date. My future. I whispered. How long has that been there? My father did not answer. Because both of us knew the truth. The valley was not predicting what would happen. It was recording what had already happened. And somewhere in that underground room was the story of how I would disappear. I did not open the notebook. That is the part of the story people always question. They ask me why. Why would I walk away from the one piece of evidence I had been searching for my entire life? Why would I not look at the pages? Why would I not read the explanation? The answer is simple. Because by that point, I understood the most dangerous thing about Black Hollow. It did not need to lie. It only needed to show you something you desperately wanted to believe. I had spent years searching for answers about my father. And now the valley had placed those answers directly in front of me. Too perfectly. Too easily. That was what frightened me. Real answers are usually complicated. They are messy. They hurt. They require acceptance. But Black Hollow offered something else. A perfect explanation. A story where every missing piece suddenly fit. And I had learned enough by then to know that anything offering you exactly what you want is worth questioning. My father pulled me away from the opening in the floor. Do not read it. His voice was firm. Almost angry. I looked at him. Why? Because it won't show you the truth. He looked down into the hidden room. It will show you what you are ready to accept. The words stayed with me. Because they explained everything. The voices. The memories. The photographs. The impossible recordings. The valley was not changing reality. It was changing the way we experienced reality. It was not creating a nightmare. It was making people build their own. We moved away from the broken floor and deeper into the research station. My father locked the door behind us. I almost laughed. The gesture seemed meaningless. What could a wooden door protect us from? But I understood why he did it. Humans need rituals. Small actions that tell our minds we still have control. Even when we know we don't. Tell me everything, I said. My father remained silent. 30 years, Dad? The word felt strange. I had not said it out loud in decades. His expression changed. A mixture of pain and surprise. You don't get to disappear for 30 years and still protect the truth. He looked away. I continued. I deserve to know. For a long time, the only sound was the wind moving through the broken walls. Then he finally spoke. When I first found Black Hollow, I thought it was a place. I waited. That was my mistake. He sat down against the wall. The valley is not a location. Not exactly. What is it then? He looked at me. I don't know. That answer would have frustrated me years earlier. But now, it felt honest. Everything I studied suggested the same thing. The forest reacts to human perception. People enter with memories. They leave with memories changed. Some people forget things. Some people remember things that never happened. Some people. He paused. Some people cannot tell the difference anymore. I thought about Melissa's recording. The second voice. Her own voice. The fear in her words. Did they all lose their minds? My father shook his head. No. The answer came immediately. No, that's the mistake people make. He looked toward the darkness outside. They assume losing yourself means becoming irrational. It doesn't. It means becoming convinced of something that nobody else can see. I understood what he meant. A person can be completely logical, completely intelligent, and still be trapped by something invisible. A belief. A memory. A fear. My father reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object. An old compass. I recognized it instantly. My father's compass. The one found missing after he disappeared. I stared at it. You had this? He nodded. I've carried it the entire time. Why? He looked down. Because it was the only thing that stayed the same. He opened the compass. The needle pointed north. Perfectly still. I frowned. Mine stopped working. I know. Why does yours work? His face became serious. Because I stopped trying to use it to leave. I did not understand. He continued. The valley reacts to resistance. The more you fight it, the more lost you become. So you just accepted staying? No. His eyes hardened. I accepted what it wanted me to understand. Before I could ask what that meant, a sound came from outside. A whistle. 3 notes. Slow. Simple. My father immediately stood. The color disappeared from his face. What is it? He looked toward the window. We need to move. What was that? He grabbed his backpack. Something I hoped you wouldn't hear. I followed him. You're not answering me. He stopped. Then said, when I first came here, I was not alone. The room became colder. There were 6 researchers. All experienced. All prepared. What happened? His eyes moved toward the forest. 5 of them left. I waited. And? My father looked at me. They weren't the same people when they came back. A silence followed. What happened to them? He picked up his equipment. They couldn't remember what they were supposed to remember. I felt a chill. What does that mean? It means they returned home. They returned to their families. They returned to their lives. But something was missing. What? My father looked at me. The parts of themselves that made those lives matter. I thought about that. The idea was more terrifying than death. Not losing your body. Losing the meaning attached to it. Your memories. Your connections. Your reasons for caring. Your reasons for being afraid. My father opened the back door of the station. The forest waited outside. We leave now. I followed him. But before stepping out, I looked back one last time. At the broken floor. At the hidden room. At the notebook with my name. Something moved down there. A shadow. I froze. Did you see that? My father did not look. Don't. Someone is down there. No. His voice became sharper. Daniel. I looked at him. That is the first rule. What? Never investigate something that wants you to investigate it. The words hit me. Because that was exactly what I had been doing since I entered Black Hollow. Following clues. Chasing answers. Moving deeper every time the valley revealed something. Maybe I thought I was hunting the mystery. Maybe the mystery had been guiding me the entire time. We moved through the forest. My father walked quickly but carefully. Like someone who knew exactly where he was going. After 30 minutes, I noticed something strange. The forest sounds had returned. Birds. Wind. Animals. Normal life. I almost felt relief. Then I noticed my father was not relieved. He looked worried. Why aren't you happy? He stopped. Because this isn't the real forest. I stared at him. What? He pointed ahead. A small stream crossed our path. That wasn't there before. I looked at the water. It looked completely normal. Clear. Moving. Natural. What does that mean? My father looked back the way we came. It means the valley is changing again. Changing the landscape? No. He shook his head. Changing what we remember about the landscape. I looked at the stream. And suddenly, something felt wrong. I had crossed that stream before. I remembered it. But I had never been there. I remembered stepping over the rocks. I remembered falling. I remembered my father grabbing my arm. I remembered laughing. A childhood memory. A memory that felt real. Except my father had never taken me there. I looked at him. His face told me he saw it too. You remember it? It was not a question. I whispered. How? My father looked away. Because the valley is starting to mix things. Your memories. Mine. The memories of everyone who has been here. The wind stopped. The forest became quiet. Then, somewhere far away, a voice called. Not my father's. Not my mother's. Not mine. A voice I had never heard before. A voice belonging to someone who should not have known me. Daniel Mercer. My father grabbed my arm. Don't answer. The voice came again. Closer. You already know what happens next. I looked at my father. What does that mean? He looked terrified. Because he understood. The voice was not trying to lure me deeper. It was not pretending to be someone I loved. It was doing something much worse. It was proving that it knew my future. The trees began moving. Not from wind. From something passing between them. My father whispered. We are too late. I looked at him. Too late for what? He stared into the darkness. Too late for the valley to decide. A pause. Then. Now it is trying to remember you. And somewhere beyond the trees. Something answered. With my own voice. The sound of my own voice coming from the darkness should have terrified me. And it did. But not in the way I expected. A normal fear response is simple. Something threatens you. Your body reacts. Your heart races. Your instincts tell you to run. But hearing yourself speak from somewhere you are not. That creates a different kind of fear. A deeper one. Because it attacks something more fundamental. The belief that you are only one person. That there is only one version of you. That your thoughts belong only to you. Standing there in the middle of Black Hollow, I felt that belief begin to weaken. My father tightened his grip on my arm. Do not follow it. I looked at him. You know what that is? He did not answer immediately. That hesitation told me everything. You've heard it before. His silence confirmed it. When? He looked toward the trees. Many times. The forest around us remained completely still. No birds. No insects. No wind. Nothing. Like the entire valley was waiting for my next decision. My father finally spoke. The first time I heard it, I thought it was my brother. I looked at him. You had a brother? He nodded. I never told you about him. Why? Because there are things people bury for a reason. His voice became quieter. My brother disappeared when we were children. I listened. Not because I wanted to. Because Black Hollow had a way of forcing people to pay attention. He was older than me. Braver than me. He was the person everyone expected to succeed. My father looked down. And I was the one who survived. The words carried a weight I understood immediately. Survivor's guilt. A wound that does not heal because there is no physical injury. A person can survive an event and still feel like they lost something they were not allowed to keep. What happened to him? My father stared into the trees. He followed a voice. The answer was simple. Almost too simple. He heard my grandmother calling him. She had been dead for years. I felt a cold sensation. And he went after it? My father nodded. We found him 3 days later. Where? Inside a valley that wasn't on any map. My stomach tightened. The same valley? No. His eyes met mine. That's what I spent my life trying to understand. The valley isn't always the same place. I looked around. The trees. The mountains. The darkness. What do you mean? My father took a breath. It doesn't exist the same way for everyone. The idea unsettled me. A location should be fixed. A mountain should be a mountain. A river should be a river. But Black Hollow did not behave like a place. It behaved like a reflection. A mirror. And mirrors do not show what is in front of them. They show what is looking into them. We continued walking. My father led me through the forest with the confidence of someone who had memorized a nightmare. Every few minutes he stopped. Not because he was lost. Because he was listening. Finally I asked, "What are you listening for?" He answered without looking back. "Changes." "What kind of changes?" "The ones you don't notice." That answer bothered me. Because I knew exactly what he meant. The most dangerous things are often not the things that appear impossible. They are the things that appear almost normal. A familiar path. A familiar voice. A familiar memory. The things that lower your defenses. After another hour, we reached a clearing. In the center stood an old stone structure. At first, I thought it was a ruin. But as I approached, I realized it was something else. A marker. An ancient one. Older than the research station. Older than the trails. The stone was covered with symbols. Some looked like writing. Some looked like drawings. But one symbol appeared repeatedly. A circle. Broken in the middle. I had seen it before. On the trees. In the research notes. In my father's journals. "What is this?" My father stopped beside it. "No one knows." "Then why does everyone keep drawing it?" He looked at the symbol. "Because everyone who comes here eventually realizes the same thing." "What?" He touched the broken circle. "Something is missing." I stared at the symbol. "Missing from what?" He looked at me. "From themselves." The answer bothered me because it felt true. Not logically. Emotionally. Humans are made of incomplete pieces. Things we regret. Things we hide. Things we never say. Maybe the reason Black Hollow was so powerful was not because it created fear. Maybe it was because every person already carried a hidden wilderness inside themselves. A place they avoided exploring. A place full of memories they refused to enter. The stone marker began making a sound. A low vibration. My father immediately stepped away. "What is happening?" He did not answer. The symbols on the stone began appearing different. Not moving. Changing. Like my eyes were understanding them differently every second. Then I saw something. A name. Carved into the stone. Daniel Mercer. I stepped closer. "No." My father grabbed my shoulder. "Don't touch it." But I already knew. The stone was not showing my name because it had been waiting for me. It was showing my name because I had been here before. A memory flashed. A sudden image. Me standing beside this exact stone. My hand touching the symbol. My father behind me. Older. Afraid. I pulled away. My breathing became uneven. "I've been here." My father looked at me. "No. I remember this." His expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. "That's impossible." I looked at him. "You knew." He said nothing. "You knew this would happen." His silence became an answer. Anger returned. "You brought me here." "No. You knew the valley would show me this." "I knew it might." "Might?" My voice rose. "You've been hiding information from me my entire life." My father looked hurt. But he did not defend himself. "I was trying to keep you away." By lying? By letting you hate me. The words stopped me. What? He looked at the ground. If you hated me, you wouldn't search for me. The silence after that was painful. Because I understood. He had chosen to become a villain in my memory. Because he believed that was safer than becoming a reason for me to enter the valley. But it had failed. Because people do not stop searching for what they love. They just become better at pretending they stopped. Before I could say anything, the forest changed. A sound moved through the trees. 100 footsteps. Slow. Careful. Approaching. My father looked around. We have to go. From what? He did not answer. Then I saw them. Figures between the trees. Standing silently. Watching us. At first, I thought they were people. And maybe they were. That was the terrifying part. Because I recognized some of them. Melissa. Aaron. Thomas. The missing. They stood in the distance. Unmoving. Their faces calm. Almost peaceful. But something was wrong. They were not looking at me. They were looking at my father. One of them stepped forward. Thomas Reed. The survival instructor. The man who had disappeared weeks earlier. He looked exactly like the photograph. Alive. But empty. Daniel, he said. My father moved in front of me. Don't listen. Thomas smiled. Not cruelly. Sadly. He never told you what happened. My father said nothing. Thomas continued. He never told you why he stayed. I looked at my father. What is he talking about? Thomas looked directly at me. Your father wasn't trapped here. The forest went silent. He chose to stay. My father closed his eyes. And that was when I knew. There was a truth he had not told me. A truth bigger than the valley. Bigger than the disappearances. Bigger than everything I thought I understood. Thomas stepped closer. Ask him what happened the day he disappeared. I looked at my father. The man who had spent 30 years hiding in the forest. The man who had warned me about memory. The man who told me not to believe everything I remembered. And suddenly I wondered. What memories had he been hiding from me? My father whispered. Daniel. But before he could finish, another voice spoke. A voice behind me. My own voice. You already know. I turned slowly. Standing beside the stone marker was another version of me. Older. Tired. Broken. Looking at me with the sadness of someone who had already lived through what I was about to experience. And he said, the worst part isn't discovering what happened here. A pause. It's realizing you were always part of it. I wanted to run. That was my first instinct. Not because of the figure standing near the stone marker. Not because of the voices. Not because of the impossible sight of another version of myself standing 20 feet away. I wanted to run because my mind was trying to protect itself. There are moments when the human brain encounters something it cannot process. Something that does not fit into any existing category. The brain does not immediately accept it. It searches. It compares. It rejects. It creates distance. Anything to avoid rewriting the entire understanding of reality. And standing there in Black Hollow, watching myself look back at me, I felt that internal battle happening in real time. One part of me screamed, this is impossible. Another part whispered, but you recognize him. My father stepped between us. Daniel. His voice was low. Careful. Like he was speaking to someone standing near the edge of a cliff. Do not look at him for too long. I looked at my father. What is happening? He did not answer. That was becoming his pattern. Every time I reached the center of the truth, there was another layer of silence. Another locked door. Another thing he believed I could not handle. I pointed toward the figure near the stone. Who is that? My father looked at him. And the sadness on his face told me more than words could. He is what happens when someone stays too long. My stomach tightened. That's me. My father said nothing. The other Daniel smiled slightly. Not because he was happy. Because he understood. You still think this is about finding answers? His voice sounded exactly like mine. Not similar. Not close. Mine. You still think if you understand the valley you can leave? I stared at him. Who are you? He looked toward the stone marker. I am the part of you that stayed. The words made no sense. But somehow they did. The valley was built around fragments. Memories. Regrets. Pieces of identity. Maybe this was another fragment. A possibility. A version. A warning. My father stepped forward. Don't listen to him. The older version of me looked at my father. You said the same thing to me. My father froze. A terrible realization moved through me. What does that mean? Either of them answered. I looked between them. How many times has this happened? Silence. Then my father said, more than once. The forest seemed to grow darker. What do you mean? My father looked exhausted. I thought I could stop the cycle. The cycle? He looked at the stone. Every person who enters Black Hollow reaches a moment where they have to choose. What choice? His eyes moved toward me. Whether to accept what the valley shows them. I looked at the other Daniel. And if they don't? My father answered quietly. They stay. The older Daniel nodded. Not physically. He looked at me. That's what people misunderstand. The valley doesn't keep your body. It keeps your attachment. I felt a strange emptiness in my chest. Because suddenly I understood the missing people. Melissa. Aaron. Thomas. They were not prisoners. They were people who had found something they could not walk away from. A person they lost. A regret they carried. A question they needed answered. The valley gave them one final chance. And they took it. My father looked at me. Your mother. The name alone hurt. I looked away. What about her? His expression changed. That is why you came here. I shook my head. No. Yes. I came because of you. My father looked at me. And why did you care about finding me? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because the answer was obvious. I wanted to know why he left. Why he chose the forest. Why I was not enough. That was the wound. Not curiosity. Not research. Not adventure. Abandonment. The valley had known that from the beginning. The older Daniel spoke softly. That's why it chose you. I looked at him. It doesn't choose people because they are weak. A pause. It chooses people because they still have something they cannot release. The words hit harder than I expected. Because they were true. I had spent years pretending I had moved on. I built a career studying wilderness. I helped other people find closure. I investigated disappearances. I searched for answers. But underneath everything was the same question. Why wasn't I enough to make him stay? The forest changed. The figures around us disappeared. Melissa. Aaron. Thomas. Gone. Only my father, the other Daniel, and me remained. The older Daniel stepped closer. You want to know what happened the day he disappeared? I looked at my father. He lowered his eyes. Tell him. My father's voice was barely audible. The older Daniel nodded. Your father did not disappear because he was lost. He disappeared because he found something. I looked at my father. What? The older version of me answered. Me. The world seemed to stop. My father closed his eyes. And suddenly every piece of the story shifted. The photographs. The notebook. The messages. The impossible memories. My father had not been studying the valley. He had been studying what happened to people after the valley changed them. Including himself. The older Daniel continued. When your father entered Black Hollow, he found a version of himself that had already accepted the truth. I looked at my father. Is that true? He nodded slowly. I found something that looked like me. Something? He swallowed. I don't know what it was. Then why did you stay? His answer came quietly. Because it knew things only I knew. I felt a chill. What things? My father looked at me. Things I had forgotten. The sentence hung in the air. Because that was the deepest fear of Black Hollow. Not losing memories. Not gaining false ones. The worst possibility was this. What if the memories you lost were the ones that mattered? My father continued. I spent years trying to determine whether the valley was showing me truth or creating something new. And? He looked toward the trees. I never found out. The older Daniel stepped forward. But I did. My eyes moved to him. What? He smiled sadly. The valley doesn't create copies. It creates unfinished versions. The words made my skin crawl. Unfinished? Every person who enters brings every version of themselves they could have become. The older Daniel looked at me. The person you were. The person you are. The person you could have been. The wind moved through the trees. And the valley separates them. I looked at my father. Is that what happened to you? He shook his head. No. A pause. Something worse. What? He looked at the older Daniel. I left a part of myself behind. The older Daniel nodded. And I was the part he couldn't accept. I felt my chest tighten. Because suddenly the valley was no longer showing me ghosts. It was showing me consequences. Every choice. Every regret. Every abandoned possibility. The things we leave behind when we continue living. The older Daniel looked at me. You think you're here to save your father. He stepped closer. But you're actually here to decide whether you forgive him. I said nothing. Because I hated that he was right. The stone marker began vibrating again. This time louder. The broken circle carved into it began splitting apart. A crack appeared in the center. And beneath it, words emerged. Not carved. Not written. Appearing. Like the stone itself was remembering. 3 words. The first memory. My father stepped back. His face changed. Fear. Real fear. What is it? I asked. He whispered. The beginning. The older Daniel looked at me. And the reason you came here. The ground beneath us opened. Not violently. Slowly. Like the valley itself was opening an old door. Below the stone was a staircase. Descending into darkness. My father looked at me. We leave now. But the older Daniel shook his head. You can't. My father looked at him. Why? The older Daniel looked at me. Because he already remembers. I froze. What? The older Daniel pointed toward the staircase. Your first memory of Black Hollow. I stared down. I've never been here. The older Daniel looked at me with sadness. That's what the valley wanted you to believe. The darkness below seemed to breathe. And then, from somewhere beneath the earth, I heard a sound. A child laughing. My child. A memory from before I ever entered the mountains. A memory that should not exist. My father whispered. Daniel. I looked at him. How old was I the first time I came here? He did not answer. He didn't need to. Because deep inside my mind, a door had opened. And behind that door was a memory I had buried my entire life. A memory of the Appalachian forest. A memory of my father. A memory of Black Hollow. And a memory of something standing beside us. When I was only 7 years old. Something that had been waiting for me ever since. The sound of the child laughing continued beneath the earth. Soft. Distant. Almost gentle. And somehow, that made it worse. Fear is easier when something feels dangerous. A predator. A storm. A threat you can identify. But a childhood memory? A moment that should belong only to you. That is different. Because memories are supposed to be the one place where we are safe. They are supposed to be untouched. Protected. Private. But Black Hollow had found the one place inside me that I believed nothing could reach. My past. I stared down the staircase beneath the stone marker. I knew I should not go down. Every instinct I had developed through years of wilderness work was telling me the same thing. Do not enter unknown spaces. Do not follow sounds. Do not investigate something that appears designed to attract you. But there was one problem. I already knew the sound. It was not calling me. It was not pretending. It was a memory. And memories are harder to ignore than voices. My father stepped in front of me. No. The word was immediate. Almost desperate. I looked at him. You know what's down there? He looked away. That was enough. You've been there. He did not answer. Dad? The way I said it made him stop. For a moment, he was not a researcher. Not a survivor. Not the man who spent decades hiding inside an impossible valley. He was just my father. A man who knew his son was about to discover something painful. I took you there once. The words felt heavier than anything else I had heard. I stared at him. What? He swallowed. You were 7 years old. The forest disappeared around me for a moment. Not literally. But my mind shifted. A forgotten image appeared. A cabin. A fire. My father's hand holding mine. A mountain trail covered in leaves. I shook my head. No. You don't remember. I would remember. My father looked at me. Would you? The question hurt because I knew the answer. Human memory is not a perfect recording. It is a collection of moments. Some preserved. Some changed. Some buried. Especially childhood memories. Especially painful ones. I looked at the staircase. Why was I here? My father closed his eyes. Because I made a mistake. The older version of me stood silently nearby. Watching. Waiting. I looked at him. You knew this. He nodded. I remembered before you did. The anger returned. You let me walk into this place knowing everything? No. His voice was quiet. I let you walk into this place because you were already walking toward it. I wanted to argue. But I couldn't. Because he was right. My entire life had been shaped by this place. My career. My obsession with disappearances. My need to understand unexplained events. I thought I was searching for my father. But maybe my father was the first mystery I ever encountered. And everything after that was just another attempt to solve it. The staircase waited below. The darkness seemed deeper than it should have been. My father looked at me. If you go down there, you need to understand something. What? You may not like what you remember. I almost laughed. After everything I had seen, after everything I had learned, that sounded almost impossible. What could be worse? My father looked at me. Remembering that you were happy here. That stopped me. Because I understood. The most painful memories are not always the bad ones. Sometimes they are the beautiful ones. The moments we lost. The people we miss. The places we can never return to. I stepped onto the first stair. The moment my foot touched the stone, the entire valley changed. The air became warmer. The sounds disappeared. The forest above us vanished. For a second, I was not standing in Black Hollow. I was somewhere else. A summer afternoon. Sunlight. Birds. My father's voice. Stay close, Daniel. I was 7 years old. I knew it immediately. Not because I saw myself. Because I felt like myself. The world was larger. The trees were taller. Everything felt new. I was walking beside my father through the mountains. But not the mountains I knew. A younger version of Black Hollow. Before the abandoned stations. Before the missing reports. Before the fear. My father was younger. His hair darker. His face less tired. And he was smiling. I had forgotten that smile. That was the first thing that broke me. I remembered my father as the man who disappeared. The man who left. The man surrounded by unanswered questions. I had forgotten the man who laughed. The man who carried me when I was tired. The man who taught me the names of trees. The memory continued. We reached a small clearing. A place I had never seen, but somehow recognized. There was a stone in the center. The same broken circle symbol carved into it. My younger self walked toward it. My father grabbed my shoulder. "Don't touch it." 7-year-old me looked confused. "Why?" My father smiled. "Because some things are better left unknown." The memory shifted. Suddenly, another person was there. A figure standing near the trees. Watching. I felt my body tense. Because I knew. Even before seeing the face. It was me. Not the older version. Not the one from the forest. A child version. A different Daniel. Same age. Same face. Standing among the trees. Looking back at us. My younger self saw him. "Who is that?" My father looked terrified. And that was the moment I understood. This was the day he disappeared. Not the day he vanished from the world. The day he discovered something he could never explain. The child version of me stepped forward. The other child, Daniel, looked afraid. Not dangerous. Afraid. My father moved between us. "Daniel, come here." Both children looked at him. And my father realized something impossible. There were two of me. The memory ended. I returned to the staircase. I was breathing heavily. My father was beside me. Older. Broken. I looked at him. "You saw it?" He nodded. "Yes." "You saw another me?" "Yes." "What happened?" He looked down. "I made a choice." "What choice?" He looked toward the darkness below. "I chose the wrong Daniel." The words hit like a physical blow. I could not speak. The older version of me stepped closer. "He thought he was saving you." My father looked at him. "Stop." "No." The older Daniel looked at me. "You deserve to know." My father said nothing. The older Daniel continued. "That day, the valley showed your father two possible futures." I listened. "One where he took you home. And one where he stayed." My stomach tightened. He thought the valley was showing him a warning. A pause. It wasn't. The darkness below seemed to move. What was it showing him? The older Daniel looked at my father. "The truth." My father whispered. I couldn't tell which one was real. The words were painful. Because I understood. My father was not a man who abandoned his son. He was a man who faced something impossible and made a choice he regretted forever. But that did not erase the damage. Intent does not remove pain. Love does not prevent someone from hurting you. Sometimes the people who care about us the most are still capable of leaving scars. The staircase continued downward. The child laughter returned. But this time, there was something beneath it. A voice. A familiar voice. My own. "You have to see the rest." I looked at my father. He looked afraid. "What is down there?" He answered honestly. "The memory I spent 30 years trying to forget." We descended. One step. Then another. The deeper we went, the colder it became. The walls were covered with names. Hundreds of names. Every person who had entered Black Hollow. Every researcher. Every missing person. Every forgotten story. And then I saw something that made me stop. A name near the bottom. Not carved recently. Not faded. Ancient. Older than all the others. Daniel Mercer. But underneath my name was another sentence. A sentence written in my own handwriting. A sentence I had never written. "I was never searching for my father." I touched the words. The memory inside the wall opened. And I finally saw the truth. The truth about the first time I entered Black Hollow. The truth about why the valley knew me. The truth about what my father had spent 30 years trying to protect me from. Because the thing waiting at the center of the valley was not something I discovered. It was something I brought with me.